The world was still damp with the memory of the Great Flood. The earth carried the deep, jagged scars of a cataclysm that had wiped the slate of humanity clean. For the descendants of Noah, the horizon was a constant reminder of the celestial wrath that had once opened the windows of heaven. In this fragile era of new beginnings, the survivors and their children lived in the shadow of a profound trauma. They clung to the mountains of Ararat, hesitant to venture into the lowlands, fearing that the clouds might gather once more to drown the world in a second silent judgment. It was within this atmosphere of lingering dread and the desperate search for stability that a figure of unprecedented ambition began to emerge from the lineage of Ham. His name was Nimrod, the great-grandson of Noah, and he was unlike any man who had walked the earth since the days of the giants. In a time when humanity was scattered and vulnerable to the wild beasts that had multiplied in the wake of the deluge, Nimrod rose as a protector. He possessed a physical prowess that seemed to defy the limitations of common men, tracking predators that threatened early settlements and striking them down with precision. To the people, he was a hero, a shield against the untamed world. But beneath the exterior of the valiant hunter, a darker transformation was taking root, one that would alter the course of human history forever. The very essence of his identity was contained within his name. In the ancient tongue, Nimrod did not signify a protector. It carried the weight of a chilling command: let us rebel. This was not a name given by chance, but a manifesto etched into his soul. As he grew in strength, Nimrod realized the skills he used to track beasts could be applied to a much more complex prey. He shifted his gaze from the animals of the wild to the hearts of his fellow men. He transitioned from a hunter of beasts to a hunter of men's souls, capturing their loyalty and fears through charismatic oratory and the promise of a security that did not rely on the unpredictable mercies of the divine. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from as we delve deeper into the origins of this first global empire. Nimrod understood the psychological landscape of his era. He saw the way people looked at the rainbow with skepticism rather than hope, and he exploited the collective trauma of the flood to fuel his ascent. He whispered of a world where humanity would never again be at the mercy of the elements or a distant god. He proposed a new order, a civilization built on the strength of human hands and the unity of a single will. He argued that if they gathered under his banner, they could build a fortress that no flood could reach. This was the birth of the first kingdom, where the individual was swallowed by the collective pursuit of greatness. The search for the perfect stage led Nimrod to the east. There, they discovered a vast, fertile expanse known as the Plain of Shinar. It was a place of endless horizons and strategic potential, a blank canvas where Nimrod could paint his vision of a godless utopia. Unlike the rugged mountains, Shinar offered the space needed for a massive project. It was here that the first globalist agenda began to take physical form. Nimrod stood upon the sun-drenched soil and looked toward the heavens, not in prayer, but in a silent challenge. He saw Shinar not as a gift from the Creator, but as the foundation of his own eternal monument. With his wife Semiramis by his side, Nimrod prepared to issue a decree that would change everything. He gathered the masses and spoke of a destiny that transcended the limitations of their ancestors. He promised them a city and a tower that would serve as a gateway, a bridge between the earth they trod and the heavens they feared. He declared that God was no longer necessary for their ultimate survival, and together they would make a name for themselves that would outlast the stars. The air in Shinar grew heavy with the weight of this dark covenant, as the first kiln-baked bricks were moved into place for a project intended to storm the gates of God. The transition from vision to reality required a fundamental shift in the very substance of the earth. In the days of Noah, men built with what the Creator provided, hewn stone and weathered wood. But Nimrod sought something different, something forged in the intensity of human will. He introduced the kiln-baked brick, a technology that marked the first time humanity attempted to replicate nature. This was a philosophical declaration. Stone was a gift from the divine. A brick was a product of man's ingenuity. It took the raw clay of Shinar and transformed it through the purifying heat of the furnace. By mastering the fire, Nimrod's people felt they were mastering creation itself. Each brick was identical, a symbol of the uniformity he demanded. They were no longer scattered tribes. They were becoming a singular industrial machine dedicated to human progress. Then came the mortar. They did not use common clay or mud. Instead, they gathered the black, viscous tar that seeped from the depths, bitumen. This choice was steeped in dark symbolism that every laborer understood. Bitumen was waterproof, a sealant against the element that had once scoured the world. By binding their man-made bricks with this impenetrable slime, they were building a fortress against the heavens. It was a silent scream of defiance. You may send the rains again, but we have built a shell that your oceans cannot crack. This was an insurance policy against the judgment of God, a physical rejection of the covenant of the rainbow that had promised peace. Nimrod moved among the workers, a towering figure whose shadow stretched across the plain. He ruled through the intoxicating propaganda of unity. He spoke of oneness as the ultimate evolution, where no individual would stand alone against the unknown. He convinced the masses that individuality was a weakness, a fragment of the chaos that led to the flood. In the collective, he promised immortality. "Look at the mountains," he would shout. "They are static, but we are building a mountain that breathes, that will climb until it touches the throne of the stars." The people, driven by trauma, drank his words. They saw a sanctuary, failing to realize it was becoming their cage, designed to harvest their very souls for his glory. The design was a ziggurat, a stairway to the infinite. It was engineered for resonance. Nimrod and Semiramis spent hours over celestial charts, aligning the structure with the wandering stars. This was intended as a bridge between dimensions. They believed that by reaching a specific height, they could pierce the spiritual veil. This was a hidden agenda to reclaim the lost power of the Nephilim, the ancient giants who dominated the earth before the waters rose. Nimrod was obsessed with their legacy, believing their strength had been unfairly stripped away. He sought to tap into dark energies, using the tower as a conductor for spiritual power that would allow him to challenge the Almighty directly. The driving force was the desire to make a name for ourselves, the pursuit of Shem. They didn't want the identity given by the Almighty, they wanted a reputation carved by their own hands. They wanted to be authors of their own destiny, establishing a legacy to rival the divine. This motivation fueled an obsession that transcended exhaustion. As laborers hauled materials, they weren't just building. They were attempting to rewrite the order of the cosmos. They believed that if they could reach the heavens, they could demand a seat at the council of the gods, claiming their own divine right. The air around Shinar changed as the tower grew. A strange, heavy atmosphere settled over the plain. The sun hit the bricks with an unnatural glare, and the wind through the scaffolding sounded like a low, rhythmic chant. The project was no longer a dream. It had become a living entity, a monument pulsing with a dark intent. As the sun set, the first bricks of the upper reaches were laid with grim finality. The atmosphere grew thick with the scent of burning kilns and acrid tar. A shadow was falling, not from the clouds, but from human hubris. Shinar was now a theater of war, and the ground trembled under the weight of the defiance being built upon it. As the shadow of the ziggurat lengthened across the golden plains of Shinar, the work shifted from an engineering marvel to a spiritual fortress of immense scale. Nimrod was no longer merely a king. He had ascended to the role of a high priest, the intermediary between the seen and unseen powers. At his side, the enigmatic Semiramis orchestrated an occult system that bound the souls of the workers as tightly as the bitumen bound the kiln-baked bricks. She was the architect of the heart, weaving mystery and fear that transformed the construction site into a vast cathedral of rebellion. Every new level of the tower was consecrated with incense and symbolic sacrifices, a dark liturgy intended to summon the spirits of the antediluvian giants. This was the birth of the first organized religion, a system to rival the reputation of the divine, where the heavenly was harnessed for its power. The upper reaches of the tower were designed to interact with the celestial bodies. Nimrod's elite astronomers mapped the wandering stars with a precision that defied their age. The goal of having the top in heavens was not a poetic metaphor, it was a technical specification for a cosmic gateway. They believed the cosmos was composed of locked dimensions, and the tower was the jagged key designed to turn the lock. By aligning the terraces with the movements of the planets, they sought to manipulate the fabric of spiritual energy, creating a physical resonance that would thin the veil between the material and spiritual worlds. The tower was becoming a stone needle, piercing the firmament to draw out the forbidden power of the heavens. Sustaining this undertaking required an economic restructuring of the human race. Shinar became the world's first city-state, a centralized hub where every resource and hour of life was tallied and taxed for the glory of Nimrod. This was the first realization of a globalist economy where individual identity was sacrificed on the altar of a collective monolithic goal. The first city-state managed its resources to sustain such a massive undertaking through absolute control. Yet beneath the surface, a cold current of terror ran deep. Those who still held to the old ways, who remembered the quiet wisdom of Noah and the solemn covenant of the rainbow, found themselves cast as enemies of progress. Dissent was treated as high treason against the destiny of the species. The faithful were forced into the shadows, their prayers to the Almighty whispered in the night. The arrogance of Nimrod reached its zenith as the tower pierced the clouds. Standing upon the highest terrace, bathed in the thin air, the tyrant would look upward with a gaze of unadulterated defiance. In a display of supreme blasphemy that chilled the blood, he would draw his massive bow, aiming a black-feathered shaft at the silent blue expanse above. With a roar that echoed across the plains, he would release the arrow, a symbolic strike against the heart of the Creator. To the millions watching from the dust below, these acts were proof of his invincibility. They saw a man who was no longer cowed by thunder, a leader who was ready to lead an assault on God's throne. The atmosphere around the site began to vibrate with a low, rhythmic frequency, a portal sensation that made the workers' skin crawl and their minds descend into feverish, shared hallucinations. In these moments of peak construction, the true, dark purpose of the tower became terrifyingly clear to the inner circle. This was not a tomb, nor was it a simple monument to human achievement. It was a machine of war. It was a massive, brick-and-mortar conduit designed to bridge the infinite distance between the fallen earth and the gates of the divine council. Nimrod intended to storm the very heavens, to demand the secrets of immortality, and to seize the throne of the stars by force. The ziggurat was a weapon of spiritual mass destruction, an engine fueled by 1 billion coordinated thoughts. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the tower cast a shadow that seemed to absorb the light itself, standing as a tooth, ready to bite the hand of the divine. The air turned cold, not with the night, but with the presence of something ancient invited back into the world of men. The world was balanced on a knife's edge as the final brick was laid. While the torches of Shinar flickered against the night, a different light burned in the halls of the unseen. Beyond the veil of the material world, where time flows like a river into an eternal sea, the divine council sat in silent observation. The Almighty, whose gaze traverses the universe as easily as a man looks across his garden, turned his focus toward the plain of Shinar. This was not a moment of discovery, for nothing is hidden from the Creator, but a moment of judicial witness. The celestial host, those ancient beings of fire who had seen the foundations of the deep laid, watched with sorrow as the smoke of the bitumen pits rose like a profane offering. The tower, which men deemed a ladder to the stars, was seen from this height as a mere scratch upon a grain of sand. There was a profound gravity to this divine perspective. It was not fear of a rival that stirred the Almighty. The notion that a pile of sun-baked mud could threaten the throne of the stars was an absurdity. Rather, the concern was for the creature. The divine paradox lay in the reality that humanity, though fallen, still carried the imprint of the infinite. When unified in a single, rebellious purpose, they tapped into a fundamental law. That which they imagined to do, they would possess the power to achieve. This was the nothing will be impossible clause, a spiritual principle where a collective will, severed from the source of life, could create a feedback loop of evil so absolute it would consume the soul of the race. The intervention brewing in the heavens was not an act of petulance, but an expression of mercy. To allow the tower to be completed was to allow humanity to reach a point of no return, a state of spiritual stagnation where they would be forever locked in the prison of their own hubris. If Nimrod succeeded in opening his portal, he would not find the secrets of the gods. He would only find a mirror of his own darkness. The Almighty looked upon the millions of laborers, their backs scarred by the lash and their minds poisoned by the propaganda of Semiramis, and saw a people wandering into an abyss. To stop them was to save them from the ultimate consequence of their own success. Then came the moment of the divine descent. In the sacred records, it would be narrated with a subtle irony. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower. To the men on the scaffolding, their heads spinning in the thin air, they felt they were touching the hem of the heavens. But from the perspective of the infinite, the great ziggurat was so insignificant that the Almighty had to stoop to perceive it. It was a mockery of the pride that had fueled every brick. An invisible presence began to weave through the cedar beams and the layers of stone. It moved through the bitumen pits and the royal chambers of Nimrod, silent as a thought but heavy as a mountain range pressing against the chest of the world. As this divine presence permeated the site, the fabric of reality in Shinar began to warp. The air did not merely grow cold, it grew thick and viscous, as if the oxygen was being replaced by a substance from a higher dimension. The laborers, who had spent decades in the coordinated dance of construction, felt a jarring sense of spiritual vertigo. The tools in their hands felt alien, the weight of the bricks became erratic, and the golden light of the setting sun took on a bruised hue that pulsed with a low-frequency hum. This was not a storm of wind or rain, but a storm of the spirit, a gathering of forces that would soon strike at the foundation of human identity. Nimrod, standing upon his highest balcony, felt the shift first. The arrow he had prepared felt like a useless toy. The silence falling over the plain was a presence so loud it threatened to shatter bones. The workers looked at one another, their eyes wide with a terror they couldn't name. A shadow was stretching over Babel that had no source. Change had arrived. The dawn over the plain of Shinar did not bring the usual clarity of the desert sun. Instead, a grey, heavy mist clung to the base of the great ziggurat, as if the earth itself were holding its breath in anticipation of a cataclysm. The first hour of the morning shift began, as it had for years, with the rhythmic thud of hammers and the acrid smell of burning bitumen rising from the pits. A master mason named Javan, standing on a high scaffolding, turned to his apprentice to demand more mortar to set the final course of bricks for the day. But when he opened his mouth, the familiar Akkadian syllables he had spoken since birth were gone. Instead, a series of harsh, guttural sounds tumbled from his lips, sounding to his own ears like the grinding of stones. The apprentice blinked, his face twisting in a mask of sudden confusion, and replied with a sequence of melodic vowels that sounded like the rushing of a distant river. They stared at one another, the heavy tools in their hands suddenly feeling like foreign objects as a cold, paralyzing realization began to settle in their marrow. Across the vast, sprawling expanse of the construction site, the same scene was playing out in a terrifying, synchronized wave of cognitive dissonance. A foreman on the eastern ramp shouted a warning about a shifting cedar crane, his voice urgent and sharp. To the workers directly beneath the swinging shadow, however, his words sounded like the frantic barking of a wild animal. They did not move. They did not look up. The heavy beam swung wide, snapping its guide ropes and crushing three men who never heard the warning they could comprehend. The screams that followed were just as alien, filtered through 1,000 different phonetic prisms that stripped the cries of their shared humanity. The psychological terror was immediate and absolute. To be surrounded by thousands of comrades, family members, and lifelong friends, only to find them suddenly transformed into linguistic ghosts, was a horror that no physical weapon could hope to achieve. The panic spread like a viral shadow through the laborers' camps. Families huddled together in the flickering torchlight of their huts, but the sanctuary of the domestic hearth provided no refuge from the divine judgment. A mother reached for her crying child, whispering words of comfort she had used 1,000 times before, only to see the toddler recoil in sheer terror. To the child, the mother's voice had become a terrifying rhythmic drone of unrecognizable noise, a sound that carried no love, only the vibration of the unknown. The very fabric of human society, the shared reality created by the word, was being unraveled at the molecular level. It was as if the invisible threads of light that bound one soul to another had been severed by a celestial blade, leaving every individual isolated in a private prison of sound. In the royal palace, Nimrod emerged onto the high terrace, his face a contorted mask of mounting fury. Semiramis stood beside him, her hands trembling as she reached for her silver idols, her lips moving in silent prayers that no longer made sense to her own mind. He looked down upon the plains and saw the work stopping in a chaotic, jagged ripple. He saw men dropping their tools and running in aimless circles, their faces upturned to the heavens in silent or vocal agony. He drew his breath to roar a command that would restore order, to remind the masses that he was the hunter of men and the master of the earth. But as he spoke, the regal authority he had spent a lifetime cultivating vanished into thin air. What emerged from his throat was a cacophony of staccato clicking sounds that lacked even the ghost of meaning to his own ears. His elite guards, men who had bled for him in a dozen campaigns, looked at him not with loyalty, but with suspicion and a dawning, primal contempt. Without the power of the word, the tyrant was stripped of his divinity. He was no longer a god-king. He was merely a man in a golden robe making senseless noise in the wind. The great ziggurat, the focus of a generation's ambition, collapsed as a project in a matter of hours. There was no need for a physical earthquake or an invading army to breach the walls. The loss of a shared tongue was a more effective barrier than any mountain range or ocean. The tools of progress were cast aside, rolling into the grey dust of Shinar. The unity that Nimrod had forged through the dark alchemy of propaganda and the shared trauma of the flood evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a desperate primal instinct to find anyone who shared the same new, strange resonance. This confusion was the ultimate humiliation for a people who had sought to make a name for themselves independent of their creator. Their Shem, their reputation, was now a literal Babel. The spiritual significance of the moment was a direct reversal of the harmony God had intended for mankind. By withdrawing the gift of common understanding, the Almighty did not just stop a building, he fractured a rebellion that would have consumed the soul of the race. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the first groups began to move away from the tower. They did not look back at the jagged, unfinished silhouette against the bruised sky. They clutched their belongings and followed the sounds that felt like home. The plains of Shinar, once the heart of a global empire, were becoming a graveyard of hubris. The dispersion had begun. The great ziggurat stood as a jagged tooth against the bleeding sky, a monument to a unity that had curdled into madness. The exodus from the plains of Shinar did not happen with a single trumpet blast, but with 1,000 quiet retreats into the gathering gloom. Small bands of people, linked only by the strange new resonance of their vocal cords, gathered their few remaining belongings in the dead of night. They looked at their former neighbors with eyes full of suspicion and a profound, hollow sorrow. The shared dreams of a world without God had been replaced by the immediate, crushing reality of individual survival. As these groups drifted away from the cooling kilns of Shinar, they carried with them more than just their livestock and bronze tools. They carried the lingering infection of Nimrod's grand ambition. Some moved toward the frozen obsidian reaches of the north, others followed the setting sun across the vast and unforgiving deserts, while some sought the humid, emerald embrace of the southern jungles. As the physical distance between them grew, the shared memory of their origin began to warp and fray. The story of the Great Flood and the construction of the tower remained, but it was refracted through the lens of their new, fragmented languages. In the mountains of the east, the tale was reshaped into a saga of celestial wars and falling stars. In the islands of the west, it transformed into a haunting myth of drowning gods and rising tides. Yet, the haunting architecture of Shinar followed them like a shadow. Wherever they finally settled, they attempted to recreate the lost glory of Babel. From the stepped pyramids rising out of distant jungles to the massive earthen mounds of the northern plains, the silhouette of the ziggurat was etched into the collective soul of humanity. They were no longer one people, but the blueprint of their rebellion remained fundamentally the same. Shinar itself became a hollow shell, a ghost city where the desert wind whistled through the empty scaffolds and the bitumen pits grew cold and stagnant. The once teeming streets were slowly reclaimed by the drifting sands, burying the pride of man beneath a layer of dust and silence. The forced isolation of these fleeing groups led to a secondary, slower transformation. No longer mixing in the great melting pot of Babel, the genetic threads of humanity began to pull apart in their secluded environments. In the high altitudes, chests broadened and lungs expanded. In the harsh, direct sun of the tropics, skin darkened for protection. In the dim, cool forests, stature and features adjusted to the new reality. The biological diversity of the modern world was born in the long shadows of that unfinished tower, a physical manifestation of the linguistic wall the Almighty had placed between them to curb their collective pride. Nimrod, the once mighty hunter, found himself a king of nothing but echoes and ruins. The legends of the ancients tell of his desperate, frantic attempts to pursue the fleeing tribes, hoping to bring them back under his iron yoke through sheer force of arms. But a king without a shared voice is merely a beggar in a golden crown. Ancient traditions, whispered through the generations, speak of a final, grim confrontation between the tyrant and the righteous Shem. The son of Noah, who had watched the rise of this spiritual darkness with a heavy heart, finally stood as the instrument of divine justice. In these accounts, the hunter of men was hunted in turn, and his execution served as a final warning to those who would seek to deify themselves. Nimrod's death, however, was not the end of his dark influence. Semiramis, the high priestess of the Shinar cult, ensured that his memory was deified through an intricate web of symbols and mysteries. The hunter became the sun god, the queen became the mother of heaven, and the occult system they birthed in the shadow of the tower was woven into the very fabric of every rising civilization on Earth. The Great Dispersion gave birth to the concept of the other. With different tongues came different truths, and the first wars. Borders were drawn in the earth, while the seed of Mystery Babylon waited in every distant dark corner. The silence that swallowed Shinar was never an ending, but a heavy pause in the rhythm of human rebellion. The wind, whistling through the unfinished heights of the great ziggurat, did not dissipate. It traveled, carrying the dust of ground bitumen to every corner of the expanding earth. Thousands of years have passed since the first tyrant clutched his golden scepter in a world of echoes. Yet the silhouette of that tower remains etched into the collective subconscious. History has proven to be a recurring cycle, a desperate circling back to that moment in the desert where man first decided he could scale the heavens alone. We live in an era hauntingly familiar to the days of Nimrod, where fragmented pieces of the human family are being pulled together by a force mimicking the unity of old. The modern world has constructed its own Shinar, though materials are no longer kiln-fired clay. Our bricks are silicon and code. Our bitumen is the invisible fiber-optic web pulsing beneath the oceans. This is the digital Babel, a realm where barriers of geography and language are dismantled by technology. Artificial intelligence and instantaneous communication act as a universal tongue, promising a return to a state where nothing imagined is impossible. Modern propaganda mirrors the whispers of Nimrod and Semiramis, preaching radical oneness and security, relying solely on human ingenuity. We seek to build a name in virtual heavens, creating digital monuments to grant us immortality, bypassing the limitations of our fragile post-flood existence. The spiritual warning in Babel's ruins is more relevant today than ever. The danger of humanism without a divine anchor remains. Unity built on pride inevitably curdles into sophisticated tyranny. When we attempt to bridge the gap between finite and infinite through our own strength, we find only the hollow reflection of our own ego. The Babel mindset is a persistent infection, a belief we can engineer utopia through technology while remaining in defiance of the Creator. It is a quest for power over relationship, a desire to be like the Most High without being with Him. The height of our ambition is matched only by the depth of our spiritual isolation. However, Babel finds its resolution not in further isolation, but in a miraculous event centuries later in Jerusalem. If Babel was the judgment of tongues, Pentecost was the redemption of the Word. Where the Almighty once confused the language of rebels to scatter them in mercy, He later poured out His Spirit to unite the humble in truth. In that moment, languages did not disappear, but they were infused with a meaning transcending syntax and sound. This was the fix for the fracture of Shinar, a unity birthed from internal transformation. It proved that true oneness is not found in a tall building or global government, but in a shared recognition of the divine. Looking back at Nimrod's rise and fall, we see the tragedy of the hunter who became the hunted. He sought to fill the void in the human heart with the weight of stones and the roar of the masses, only to end as a king of shadows. His story teaches that the towers we build, careers, reputations, technological dependencies, are fragile attempts to find security in a world feeling the tremors of the flood. We are still a people who fear being scattered, longing for a name that outlasts the dust. But Shinar's final revelation is hope. The ultimate promise is that only one kingdom will truly stand. It is a kingdom not built with bricks, but established on the foundation of grace. As digital towers rise, the ruins of Babel stand as a silent testimony that unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Nimrod's story ends with a call to stop building upward in defiance and start walking inward in humility toward the only gate leading to the heavens. Humanity's destiny was never to reach the sky through construction, but to receive it through communion. The dust of Shinar may settle, but the invitation to true unity remains open to all. Only then will the confusion of tongues cease, replaced by the eternal harmony of a world at peace with its maker. The bricks of man will crumble, but the truth remains forever unshaken.